out where that noise is coming from. Oh, hey, everybody. Welcome to the Nerdy Photographer Podcast. I'm your host, Casey Fatchett. If you've never listened to the show before, in addition to providing entertaining and informative photography-related information, I also go on adventures with the crew of the Starship Fibonacci. I call them my #NerdyPhoto crew. Right now, there's a weird noise in the lower decks of the ship that I'm investigating, but I can't quite seem to pin down a location. Well, I can figure that out while you're listening to the episode. It's officially spooky season, everybody, and in this episode, I'm talking to my friend Spencer Lum about a very scary topic for professional photographers, getting ghosted. Oof. Spencer and I talk about how you can avoid having your potential clients disappear like you just ate a power pellet in Pac-Man. Ooh, boo. And there it is again. Stay tuned for my talk with Spencer right after the break.
The world is a confusing, stressful, and often frightening place.
And we each have our own unique coping mechanisms that help us get by.
Some people will tell you that when life gives you lemons, you should make lemonade.
No, that's terrible advice. Just randomly getting free fruit is extremely suspicious. Haven't you heard of Snow White?
That's actually a really good point. It's usually not a great idea to consume anything if you're not totally sure what's in it.
If you're the type of person who copes with discomfort by making strange jokes and who enjoys losing yourself in a creepy and sometimes bloody mystery,
please join us for our dark comedy podcast, Studying Scarlet.
We alternate weekly between true crime and fictional crime, and we even take listener requests for episode topics.
So if you too have a morbid sense of humor, we'd love to welcome you into our weird, quirky, and sometimes disturbing world.
Studying Scarlet is available on your favorite podcast app, and you can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter.
We can't wait to meet you.
Please subscribe today.
Yeah, so I'm not sure how we handle the situation.
Did you have a contract?
Well, I had one I found for free online, but my lawyer says it might not hold up.
Next time you should head over to nerdyphotographer.com. They've got a selection of contract templates for weddings, events, portrait sessions, and even for hiring second photographers and associate photographers, which would certainly have helped you in your current situation.
Really? I will check that out. Nerdyphotographer.com?
Yep, nerdyphotographer.com. They've got all sorts of contracts and agreements that can help make sure to protect you and your clients. So what are you going to do?
Well, we just have to wait and see what happens, I guess.
So, no pants on?
Oh, no, anything below the waist. Totally Porky Pig in it.
Impressive.
Not really. Yeah, it was pretty cold out.
Ew.
Yep.
Hello, and welcome to the Nerdy Photographer Podcast. It is spooky season, and we're talking about spooky stuff in a lot of ways. And welcoming back to the podcast, Spencer Lum. Welcome, Spencer.
Hey, it's good to be here.
And our spooky topic is something that scares me quite often, is getting ghosted by potential clients. And ghosting is it's one of those things that actually, like, for me, drives me kind of crazy because I don't know where things stand. I don't know about you. How do you feel about it? If it's we've talked before about different things. Sometimes you feel that something I find is negative, you find is an opportunity. So, what are your thoughts on ghosting?
Well, okay. So, I mean, a ton of them. I think it's one of the most frustrating things out there. It's hard not to let it get in your head. But I'm just gonna kind of wing it with what I talk about here, and I'm going to talk about something that just hit me literally right this second. And as soon as you introduced me, right, what do I say? I'm like, hey, it's good to be here. And that's thinking about how, like, every single podcast I've ever done, I say those exact same words, and I hear everyone's kind of got their thing, and they all essentially say the exact same thing over and over and over. And one of the things I think that makes this process so frustrating is things feel unpredictable. Like, there's uncertainty. You don't know if someone's going to respond. You don't know if they're going to get back to you. And I'm going to talk a lot about the big picture as we go on, because I think it's really important to understand the process. But the reason I'm talking about this is because it's not just me who's predictable. I mean, people are fundamentally predictable. There are certain patterns that will start to happen over and over and over again. And so, the key here is to always be able to step back and recognize that even though it feels like when you're in it, you're waiting for a response, that everyone's a little different, which is true, they all are, that there are patterns and that there are predictable things that will happen. And what we're trying to do is not to get fixated on any one event. Say, this person didn't reply, this person did reply, this one response worked this one time, so it's great. What we're trying to do is step back and figure out what, in the most predictable way, leads to the best outcome. And so that's going to come up again and again, I suspect, as I talk more about this. But I think it's really important to understand that there are patterns of behavior in any audience, in any market. And what we're really trying to do when we figure out our best response to ghosting is to figure out the response that is going to be optimized for those patterns.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that, for me, when I would say, like, as a pattern, one of the things that when I notice the biggest amount of, like, people just disappearing after, any sort of communication is they'll normally, like, is when somebody reaches out asking just for prices. Like, hey, can you give me your pricing? And we've talked about this, at various times. Like, what's your response to that? My response tends to usually be like, I want to get on the phone or like on a Zoom or something and talk to you about your wedding or whatever the project is, so that I can better understand what you want, and we can use all of those things that we've talked about in, like, making sales and other stuff that we've talked about before. And usually when it's an email, they'll say, like, oh, I want to, like, hey, can you send me your price list, whatever. And my response being, I don't, I don't just, like, send out the price list. I want to talk to you. And then that's when, like, you hear nothing. I think that's like the pattern that I notice most of the time, like, that when it happens most frequently.
Yeah. And, I want to point out, I think that's a great approach, right? Super smart. And I just kind of, depending on, like, how experienced someone is, they may or may not have picked up on something that I saw you talking about there. So I just want to point it out, which is that you're coming from what I call a consultant mindset, or, an expert, right? An expert is a person where when you talk to people, it's your job to help solve a problem for them. You're not just a number on a price sheet. And it's really important to understand that mindset, because I think a lot of times it feels like you've got a gun to your head. Someone asks for something and you've just got to deliver, or else they're going to bolt and they're going to go away. And so just, I like what you did right off the bat, where you explained it's like you are there to help solve a problem. And for anyone who's newer to this, it's really easy to kind of wither in the face of the pressure and start to, change how you respond and change how you act, and start, whether you're writing an email or talking with people, to kind of come off more as, okay, I'm here to do whatever you want. And it's really important. Everyone should always, whenever you're selling, the goal is not to sell as in push things on people, but is to come in and say, how can I help someone? And to really help people, you have to position yourself as an expert. So I just want to point that out, because I think kind of that's embedded in what you said, but so often it's easy to forget that when you're on the spot, or when you see something that's like, oh, this sounds like it could be a really good booking, and suddenly you start to want it, and you start to feel like you're at the mercy of whatever people are asking out of you. But going back to what you said, right, about, okay, so we've got a certain response, we've got a certain place, and I will get into some of the smaller, like some of the details about what people can do. But, I'm going to kind of, again, step a little bit backwards first.
Okay.
To give the big picture, because it's a numbers game, right? People are predictable, but it doesn't mean everyone does the exact same thing. What it means is there are going to be certain responses that are most common. There are going to be certain patterns that emerge, and they are going to depend on what you do. So the what you do part, we're going to get into that in a little bit. But, in anyone who's ever, and I know most people have not done direct marketing, but if anyone's ever done direct marketing or gone heavily into ads, they know the first thing you do is you optimize. And what does that mean? Well, you test putting out content, essentially, or you test an approach for an ad, or you test an approach for something you say, and you see how people respond.
Right.
Now, this is really important, because I can't tell you, like, if I told you a tip, even if I told you the best tip possible, I mean, even if I give you, let's say I took my best, the best email I'd ever had, and I showed it to you, and you had the exact same audience as me, it doesn't mean it's going to work every single time you use it.
Right.
Because even though there are patterns, part of those patterns, some of them are going to be positive, and some are going to be negative results. And so the mindset we have to have is, okay, my goal is to test out responses to see which one is optimal. I mean, if you can imagine, let's pretend like in your particular audience, I'm just going to make up numbers here, but let's say 10% of the people would reply a 90% ghost, right? If you change that to make it so that 30% reply and 70% ghost, well, if you send out, that still means
it's a big
that
number.
any one random email is going to be mostly ghosted, right? 70% are still ghosting you, but that's a 300% improvement in response. And so what we're after is not the magic email, right? What we're after is a testing mindset where we take something and we test out different approaches, and we work with them based on the responses we get, but we also work with them enough to get a feel for how, which things are actually generating, what the pattern is for any given type of response. And that's how we get in control of the process. Because, the thing is that really counts, and a lot of people, they won't take this testing mindset. They'll think, oh my God, I'm afraid to try this one approach because what if it doesn't work? And, the odds are, well, even if it doesn't work, maybe it lowers your chances by 20%. Maybe it raises them by 100%. Who knows? But the point is that it's not like all or none. Like if you try something new and it doesn't work out, or if it does work out, it doesn't mean that that's guaranteed to be the slam dunk approach. And if it doesn't work out, it doesn't mean it failed. It just means you just have one piece of data in. And the way we get in control is we say, okay, I'm going to test this out, and my goal is to simply improve on the response I have right now, not to find kind of the magic answer out there. The magic, if you keep improving every single time, you send out a batch of responses, and then, 3 months later, you send out another batch, you give it a year, and it might sound like a ridiculously long time, but that's only one season. Yeah. And hopefully you're going to be in business a lot longer than one season. By the end of one season, you're going to have responses going to work much, much better. And so the goal is constant improvement. The goal is not like fix everything instantly. In fact, instantly will do the exact opposite. It means you kind of haphazardly try this approach and that approach, and you jump from this, you listen to this one expert and that one expert, and you never have any idea what seems to be working better or worse, and you're just kind of like throwing out what sticks, and everything feels random and out of control, and you never have a sense of things coming together because what you're doing is trying out vastly different approaches and not using each one long enough to see how it works with your particular audience. And so
I think one of the things you have to do there is like like you were saying, you have to test it out, and you have to sit there and go like, okay, this is what I'm going to do. This is what I'm going to try, or I'm going to try this and track it. Like find some way to track it. Like, I mean, people use like there's CRM softwares of different kinds, like I use Pixify. There's whatever, like all the different types of software, like Honeybook and whatever. Like you can put like a little notice next to people, like a lead or whatever. I break down my leads by different types of approaches that I use while I'm like in that process of talking to them, and say like, oh, I did this. I specifically push to texting, like with this couple or with this client, like saying like, well, let's just, like, can I text you about that? Instead of saying, can we get on a phone call? Because some people don't react to phone calls. But I want to see like how, is there a different response to that? Or is there a different like messaging way, the way that they want to communicate, to find out where they're most comfortable, and trying those different things to see what gets a better response.
Yeah, exactly. I think when I was first working on my sales, and to give you an idea, I mean, this is about, the numbers here are more about like the booking from the meetings and not like the ghosting part. But I remember, I used to book like in my meetings, like 30 something, anywhere from 30 to 40% average. And I kind of tracked it much looser at that point, but it would kind of waver from year to year. So that would typically be the range. And I remember I brought it up to about 92% at one point, until I got a little lazy and kind of dropped back down. But for a long period, I was holding around like in the 90s. And the thing is that what got me there is exactly what you said. I tracked religiously. I tracked every, and this also included for email responses. I tracked the responses I used. I tracked what people said. I tracked every little note I could take. I tracked the images I was showing in the meeting. I mean, anything you name it, I tracked it. And that made a huge difference because suddenly I could see, oh, this thing I've been doing, this isn't a very good idea. Or what I started to see is, oh, there's this thing that I do that I didn't even realize that I did, but I started to notice it because I tracked it. I used to do the opposite. I'd bury my head in the sand and think, oh my God, that meeting went horrible. I don't want to think about it. And that, of course, and the same goes for responses, like when people send, get in touch for inquiries. And so, yes, the tracking is, it matters so much. I'm trying to remember. Yes, I was trying to remember a great quote. From who is it? You can, nor can I remember the quote. But basically, the idea is whatever you can measure is what you can manage. If you don't measure it, you can't manage it. That means starts with in the sales process tracking everything that you do. So yes, absolutely.
If you don't have the data, if you don't have it, you can't learn from it.
Yeah, absolutely. If you don't have it, you can't learn from it. And there are exceptions and blah blah blah. And there's sometimes, depending on your interpretation, Peter Drucker, that's who the expert I was trying to think of. But and blah blah blah, people who push back on it. But I think at a really fundamental level, measuring is connected to managing. And so, anyway, yes. So now, of course, I've completely lost track of where we were.
Well, you're talking about tracking the things that you like, your responses to people to see what in turn what their response is.
Yeah, right. So I break this whole process down to kind of zoom in a little bit and start to get a little more detailed. And once you've got this testing mindset, you've said, you've recognized there are certain patterns, and your job is to unearth those patterns and optimize for them, right? Then the next thing, of course, becomes, well, what do you do to actually test, and what things do you try? And so let me push in a little deeper into that idea. And so, again, I'm going to start off with a mindset thing. And I think sales and mindset is so important. Like, we've established the first thing, right? That you always want to be an expert. And an expert doesn't mean you're bossy and pushing people around. And that's what selling in kind of the negative sense really is. I mean, what is an expert? An expert is someone who takes care of your audience. So that's number one. But going further with number two, when you're sending testing responses, it's critical that you have to be willing to take a certain amount of risk. And by risk, I don't mean like you have to do really crazy things, but invariably, there's going to be a level of discomfort with trying something new that anyone feels. And the more new it is, the more that's never going to work, or that's going to be embarrassing, or whatever. And rarely are things embarrassing, and rarely are things absolute failures. Sometimes you'll try something and maybe it works worse, maybe it works better, but things are rarely absolute failures. And things are usually they're less embarrassing than they seem, but it's a natural response to feel a lot of anxiety because you're trying something different.
Yeah, and I think that there's a lot of fear that comes from trying something new because we, as you were saying, falling into patterns of behavior as a business owner. Like, people fall into patterns of behavior where they're just like, this is what I do, this is how I handle things, and we start to get afraid, like, oh, that's not working anymore, or it's not working at all, and it hasn't started to work, or it used to work and it doesn't work now. What do I need to do? But and you're afraid to try something new because you're like, oh, but this always worked before. Like, I should stick with it because I never had a problem with it before. Well, you're never going to improve unless you take those risks. There's something I was reading recently. It was about all sorts of things in your life, but it was called fixing broken windows. And the guy was saying, he had this broken window in his basement, and he was always thinking about how difficult it was to fix it, and it was going to cost him a whole bunch of money. And he'd gotten all these quotes, and it was going to cost him too much. It wasn't worth it. Just left it boarded up, but it didn't let. He didn't get any light coming in, and all these things that that were sort of negatives associated with it. And then when he was moving out of the house years later, he decided, well, I got to get this fixed because nobody's going to buy it with this busted window. And he found out it was a $20 fix. Like, all of the things that he had thought were going to be a problem, weren't actually a problem. And it cost him $20 to fix it. So he sat there for years, like, thinking, oh, I don't want to get into that because that's, it's too much. And that's very much, I think, a mindset that business owners can get into, or, you know, like where we're sitting there going, you know, I don't want to try this because I don't know that it's going to work, or I'm worried about it, you know, being too involved.
Yeah. That's so true. So, all right, so I'm going to break it down. Like, I think there are kind of like three things that just pop into my head. I'm gonna make this up as the big three. I have no idea. You know, I always say like these are the three most important things, and in reality, there are like 20 things, and it just happens to three in my head at the moment when I say it. But I think the things that the parameters that everyone wants to work with, at bare minimum, you want to think about the speed of your response, the emotional response that you create yourself with the email you send back, or however you reply to people, whether, you know, it could be by text or something else, but the impact, and then follow up, which, you know, you always hear about in sales, but so many people drop the ball, even though it's such a simple principle. And so I think anyone who wants to deal with the problem of ghosting is going to have to look at all three of these. And so I'm going to talk about what I think is the easiest one first, which is just, I always tell people, respond quickly.
Yes, as soon as possible.
And in fact, really just respond instantly. And most people don't really take issue with that, but there's always like a certain amount of people who will give pushback because they'll think, well, you know, doesn't that make me look really desperate? And so this kind of actually pairs. No, it absolutely does not, right? That's the easy answer.
People,
no uncertain terms.
No, because it makes people feel more important. The person who's contacting you feels more important when you get that quick response.
Right. And it's just one of those things. It's funny. I mean, that one persists. And I think less so now than when I first started saying this, but I still hear a certain amount of people. It's like, and yeah, like you said, I mean, it makes people feel special. And, you know, this kind of goes along with the fear mindset. A lot of times we think of the world from our own point of view. Yeah. Like, if we do something, how are people going to see us? But it's really important to remember that people think about themselves. And what someone is thinking at the point when they get a quick response is not, wow, what did this photographer have to do with their life such that they were able to respond so quickly? Because when you're thinking about it from a selfish perspective, you're thinking, what's in it for me? And what you want when you send out requests is an instant reply. Like, no one wants to wait. No one wants to see something that take an hour or a day or whatever. And so many people tell me, I always respond within 24 hours. And I'm like, 24 hours?
Respond within 15 minutes. It's right. An instant response. Like, I just to give you a sense of like how I do this, I have an instant response that comes out when everybody fills out an inquiry on my website. It takes them to a video of me saying, hey, thanks for sending me your information. I'm going to reach out and get in touch with you. But like this, and look out for my email just in case it gets, you know, sent to your spam or whatever. But like, yeah, I'm really looking forward to talking to you. But that sort of is like, that is one of my instantaneous responses, is that, you know, like, hey, this is, it also forms, you know, helps form that connection of like, I'm a person and not just an email address. But it is that like, I have had so much better like response from people who contact me now since I set that up through my inquiry form, and like people coming in through that like funnel, anybody who comes in that way, it has been automatically a more engagement because they are getting something immediately, and they feel more connected to me.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's speed. Simple, and if someone, I mean, for most people, if they're replying, let's say half a day or a day later, and they simply change it to 5, 10, 15 minutes, right? They'll see a change. I mean, again, it may not be with the next email they send, but overall, on average, they'll see a change, and it's almost a guarantee.
Spencer, I have a question for you on that regard. Yeah. Would you suggest to people sending a quick response, like immediately, and then following up with a longer, more detailed response? I think that sometimes that is something that it just popped in my head. Like, some people feel like they can't, like, whatever the inquiry is, and they have to have information together. And is it more important to get out like a quick message that just says, hey, I saw this, that you sent me this, and I wanted to get back to you quickly. I'm going to put together some more information for you. Look out for this email within the next 24 hours, whatever. So that we're setting the table for another response, but like getting that very quick, immediate response to their initial inquiry.
Yeah. Well, it depends on kind of your audience tolerance. I mean, in general, I would like my most successful process was simply sending out an immediate response and asking to schedule a meeting. Super simple. And after all the things I tested, there were other things that worked as well, but nothing really worked a whole lot better than that. And so I didn't have a follow-up email. I didn't have anything else, et cetera, et cetera. But with that said, I mean, things are just changed from audience to audience in different markets. And so when I say audience tolerance, it means kind of like, well, how much will they put up with? How much do they want to book you?
Yep.
What are your numbers at? How are people hearing about you? Are you coming in recommended from like another vendor? Or did you win like a ton of awards and somehow that got around and you're really well known as the best in your area? Or are you just getting started? No one knows who you are at all. Maybe at that point, your ghosting percentage is really, really high, right? And so if you have a high audience tolerance, I mean, sending out follow-up, putting out more material becomes much more feasible. On the other hand, if it's really low, then I would say first just work on the initial response, and you can test sending out a second one and see what happens. That's what the testing mindset is for, right?
Right.
But I what I recommend to most people is to always remember what is the next step. What's the next thing you're trying to get them to do? And you have to kind of answer that question, because for me, what I'm always trying to get people to do is to schedule a meeting.
Yep.
And that's my immediate goal. And I would, again, this is kind of another mistake that a lot of people make, is a lot of people think, well, my goal is to send as much information as possible and to get people to book me. Well, even if not to book, it's to inform whoever's getting in touch. And it's a really incredibly difficult approach unless you're super exclusive and super well known or whatever. I mean, the dynamic, you have a market where demand is massive, right? And you can afford to kind of there's a low supply, high demand situation. I mean, things like that. But in general, like a lot of times people think of the response as a chance to sell the person, whoever is sending the invoice, right? And you really don't want to sell. You just want to get them to the next step. And I just want to point out, like, that again, I see that mistake. Probably that's one of the most common, is people try to sell with their response, and it's almost impossible for any number of reasons. First, if you send people a price, I'm not saying you can never send prices. I've heard of people who've made it work, but what I always found is it kind of disincentivizes people to want to stay in touch because they weren't curious anymore.
Yeah, and they have that information and they don't care anymore. Like they just it's like, all right, I'm just going to put this in my file.
Yeah, exactly. And suddenly you get spreadsheeted. Now they just plump, they plug in the number and into their spreadsheet, and they say, this is you, and you are now represented by that set of numbers. And, the other thing is, well, if your goal is to be an expert to take care of people, and first, I mean, you have kind of the selfish goal of building value, which isn't really that selfish, but I mean, let's go, kind of your business goal, right? And I mean, you're not going to build value by sending out, let's say, a brochure or just talking about yourself in an email, because that's never going to be as persuasive as whether you do your meetings virtually or just by talking on the phone or meeting with people. I mean, a human voice and talking to people is going to be infinitely more valuable. That's the first thing. But the second thing, of course, is that if your job is to take care of people and all you do is you dump your information on them without talking about it, without learning about it, without seeing what's best for them, you're not really taking care of people either, which actually in turn raises your value, in the buyer's eyes. And so you run into this whole slew of problems when you try to sell with the response email, and which is why actually I found kind of having, for me, I never bothered having. I'm not saying again you can't have a secondary follow up, but even if you do, I tell anyone to make sure that you know what your next step is and what you're trying to get people to do, and think about not kind of the informational response you give. Actually, this kind of leads into the next point pretty nicely. because you don't want to think about the information you're giving people. A lot of times people try to sell through information, which is basically kind of dumping a bunch of facts and maybe their pricing sheet and whatever and the description of themselves and expecting like all that information is going to do the selling for them. But at the end of the day, people buy for emotional reasons. People buy for their connection with you. People buy at the end, like a thing at the end of the day, it is emotion that drives it. Like this morning, I was listening to my son and my daughter, and they were talking. And my son was trying to persuade my daughter it was basically like this little knife that flips open, and he was trying to persuade her to learn to close it, and she didn't want to because she was afraid it would cut her. She closed it the wrong way. And I was listening to my son try to persuade her, and he's like, well, knives can be really dangerous, and you can leave a knife out, and you can step on it and cut yourself and stuff like that. But the thing is, he was kind of speaking all like, and there's like the probability over your lifetime that something could possibly happen if you left it out all the time, and it was a fairly dry sort of presentation and a dry approach, right? He was trying to rely on the facts.
Right.
And what would have worked better if you had simply painted a horrifying picture of what happens when you cut yourself.
Right.
And then
use that emotion.
Said, oh my God, I can't have that. Right.
Yeah.
Or you tell a story of, there's my friend who, they cut themselves, they stepped on it, they had to go to the hospital, it's bleeding all over, and then they lost a toe. I mean, that would be great for a child. You want to tell that to your own child, but I mean, that would be infinitely more persuasive, right? Because that gets you an emotional response. And so you're about to say something.
Oh, I was going to say that's where all of our urban legends come from. I think a lot of the things that teach you a lesson not to do something. It's like it's that fear, or like it's an emotional response to the story, and it teaches you not to do something, or to do something, or to
Yeah, exactly. And so the key here is, well, the reason I rely on setting up and focus on setting up the meeting and not giving prices is because I'm relying on the emotion, in this case, of curiosity to drive people to take the next step. So I have a fast response. Generally, it would be faster than anyone else. So it's the first one in, so people aren't used to they're not inundated yet with a ton of other responses. And then I ask them for something directly, and they're still curious, what is the pricing like? And they haven't received 20 other price sheets yet. And so they're willing to respond and say, okay, yeah, I can meet on these times. And so the emotion there I'm relying on is curiosity. But what I wanted to say is kind of move into the next point, so people have a little bit more meat here on the bone and have a little more to work with. So I was saying, like, okay, let's say we've got speed down, we've got kind of our mindset straight, and we know kind of we're trying to be an expert, we know about fear, we know we don't want to sell by information, but sell by connection and emotion, right? And so, well, what do you do about in terms of responses? And again, I'll start out with the mindset, and I'll give kind of 3 approaches someone could try, and there's no limit to it. You could try more than 3 approaches, but the mindset again is, and I know I've already said emotional response, but there's no way to overstate this, because all the time people think they're getting an emotional response, and if they step back and look what they do, they're kind of still providing facts and figures and trying to say, if someone's saying language like, I'm the best, I won these awards, and this is my background, that's factual information, right? And, that's not
they get too much into the line items of like breaking down costs for individual things, as opposed to saying like building up the emotional interest in it, and like, oh man, aren't you so interested in having this heirloom album that you're gonna take from your wedding, or having the video so that you can relive those moments, whatever, as opposed to going it's going to be an extra $50 for this and an extra $100 for that. It just sort of bores them with numbers, instead of getting that emotional buy-in.
Yeah, absolutely. You have to get emotional buy-in. So I'm going to give 3 ways to, again, I don't know exactly ways, but 3 different thoughts that I had in thinking about this before getting on the phone to talk with you. But 3 different things, kind of 3 different angles that someone could think about. And, again, you can tweak each of these endlessly, but the key here is to remember that not to be afraid. Going back to that mindset issue, because I think what I want everyone to do, in fact, actually, as an exercise, everyone should take a pause, or if not take a pause, write down a note, and remember to do this as soon as they're done listening to this. They should go and look at their responses. The more, the better. but they should at the very least look at their default response and think about it from the eyes of their client. Think about how their client is going to feel. Because a lot of times what people have isn't like the most engaging or the most persuasive response. What they have is the one that makes them as the business person feel safest. And so when people say something like, "Hey, congratulations on your big day. It's amazing. I love your venue. I've shot there before, and it's one of my favorite places. And I would love to, I'd love to work with you. Everything you've said sounds amazing. Blah blah blah." Right? If it sounds like that, what I can guarantee is that there are about like 99 other people who are going to be responding saying the exact same thing.
Right.
And when someone wants to think about it, it's like, well, what does it feel like when you are looking at responses as the potential buyer, and someone has just said the exact same thing as everybody else? And so what people think of is they're thinking, well, I'm giving a normal, a nice friendly response, and it's going to be really safe. But what's really happening is
you're
that
falling into you're falling into the I don't know, the gray zone of everything's the same. You're just becoming like,
right.
Yeah, it's
right,
white noise.
So, yeah, exactly, white noise. And instead of looking authentic and real and caring, you look generic and uninteresting, and it's the worst thing possible. So what seems safe very often is actually the most dangerous thing. So, okay, 3 different angles that you could apply. Like the first one, actually, I already talked about, but that's just a super short reply. And I can't tell you how mine was incredibly short. Like there were times I basically said, "Hey, that sounds amazing. I love what you said. Let's set up an appointment because I want to make sure to be able to figure out what works for you," or whatever. I mean, the variations I had didn't have a huge effect. I mean, I tried a bunch of different ones, and I'm making this up on the spot right now. But the point is, I mean, it was essentially 1 or 2 or maybe 3 lines in an email. It was short. And people actually, it worked really well, not just because I was replying instantly, but I think one of the reasons it worked really well is because, have you ever gotten an email and it looks like it's going to be 20 scrolls long?
Yes.
Or you can do it, or you want a quick fix for something, and then suddenly you see that you have to read something has if you were to print it out, it would be like 200 pages. And it's basically a dissertation on how to fix this tiny little problem you're having or something. I mean, you look at that and you're like, the first thing your brain does is, "Oh God, no, I don't want to look at this," right? And so it almost, in fact, makes you want to shelve it. Say, "I'll get back to this later." And so I'm not saying an email has to be short, but what I am saying is that in the absence of good reason to write more, make it as short as you can,
right.
Which isn't always short. But don't make anything unnecessarily lengthy. Don't think people are going to be entranced by additional information. What it does is it just looks really intimidating. And people are busy and going to that idea again, seeing things as the client sees and putting on their hat. You have to look at everything you do and you have to say, how are they going to see this? So that's one angle, right? Now, the next two are much trickier, and you really have to play with these, and it's going to depend on your brand and your audience and everything else. But maybe the thing I'm a huge fan of is with any form of content you create, from writing an email directly to somebody to marketing, to writing on a blog post or anything, finding a way to work in humor. And humor will, it's like if you can be a little bit funny, I don't mean you don't have to be a comedian, but if you can be a little bit funny, I mean, it just shatters that wall that people naturally have, kind of the BS wall. They're filtering stuff out, saying everything that's going to be thrown is going to be marketing. And, when someone does something to make someone else smile, they just appreciate that. They appreciate the time you put in. They appreciate that even if it was a generic response you sent to everyone, they appreciate that you took the time to be different from everyone else.
Right.
And so there are all sorts of, you can go to Amazon and look up all manner of books on how to write things humorously. And there's no end to what you can do and how playful you can get here. But the key is that with this idea, if you're pursuing this angle, and this is where a lot of times people get most afraid because they think, "Oh, this is going to turn people off." And, it might. But possible. The key isn't that whether you turn people off. The key is whether you turn more people on, right? And whether you improve on where you're at.
Or as something we've discussed before, whether you're turning the right people on. like the people,
or turning the right people
or
on.
like how your client is going to, like the client that you're looking to book is, going to respond to that, and that might be the thing that pushes in your favor.
Yeah, and I was just helping. I was just helping someone out with a resume not too long ago, and it was on these similar things. We were talking about the cover letter and stuff like that. And this particular person, resume, it wasn't super unique, and it wasn't. I would have to guess that if it came in, it probably wouldn't be the strongest for most positions based on experience. And so, the reason I mentioned that is because, if someone's resume stands out on its own, it's spectacular. I would take a different approach. But because of that, what I was saying and what I was pushing for is taking an approach that was bold and had some humor, a little bit funny and over the top. Because again, you have to separate yourself. You will not create an emotional response if you're not different. And the beauty of humor is not only does humor generate a response, but so few people really try to use it. And because of that, just the effort alone tends to make you stand out. People appreciate it. So if you say something, if you just crack a little bit of a joke, if your tone is a little bit exaggerated, a little bit funny in that beginning part, I mean, it'll get you light years ahead of other people. And, sometimes it takes some playing and finessing and whatever to get it right, because it's hard to know whether humor really nails it straight out of the gate. But I think it's my kind of, when I'm writing something and like if I'm sending, like, for example, a cold pitch for something, if I'm trying to reach out to someone to partner with them and I want to, and I don't know who they are and they don't know me, if I'm replying to someone in an email for something, whether it's an inquiry or something else, and I'm trying to test out something new, one of my go-tos is always going to be finding a way to get a little bit of humor in there. And I promise anyone, if they can make someone laugh, they'll get a response. And it's gold.
Well, it's also
so that would be
disarming. You disarm people, like you said, the wall sort of comes down. Like you make them laugh, they're like, there's that sort of tension in the air of like that beforehand. Like when we go into any of these potential client relationships, and I've worked with some clients many times, and people come back to me, but we've already established the relationship. But when you're at the very beginning, you were telling them very much what the relationship is going to be like, and when they start to feel like, like you're saying, using a little bit of humor, that can lets them know that like everything doesn't have to be like just serious numbers, cut and dry all the time, and this is going to be a very sterile relationship between us. And put them at ease and like make them feel a little bit more relaxed with you, and therefore more, again, emotionally connected to you.
Yeah. Totally. So last thing, and I think this is one of the hardest to get to work, but it's what I call the impact reply. And the impact reply is basically, the reason it's hard is because there's no real, like, humor. Well, you can kind of look up what creates humor. You can look up, like, how do you, there's something, for example, called a broken list joke, which is a super easy format. Anyone listening to this can go look up a broken list joke and what that looks like. And, if you kind of wrap your head around it, it doesn't take that long to figure out how to use something like that in the intro of an email. But this last category is just totally open-ended. And an impact reply is basically when you try to do something that is really like above and beyond, it makes people kind of go, whoa. Like what used to do that at one time, and it kind of changes, I'm not saying you can't send people a video, but like if you send someone, let's say, a live response, talk to them directly, and it still has to be tested. It still has to be a good response. It can still integrate humor and what have you. But I mean, if you send a live response and you embed that in email, or if you send over customized videos of varying forms, people have tried for the past decades, and I've seen some that worked really nicely, and I've seen others that just kind of bombed. So it's creating that type of thing. I think it's tough to do in a way that works just right. But if you can do it, it will separate you from everyone else. So what does an impact reply look like? Well, this is where I don't have the answer. But what I can say is, what you want to do is you want to stick yourself in the client's shoes. Say, okay, I'm getting a bunch of email. what would really blow me away? What type of customization? What type of information? What could be said that would make me go, whoa, I have never seen anything like this. And I'm just amazed that someone took the time to do this. And, you can kind of think about like, to dig a little further, you can try to think about like, well, what is the emotion you're trying to produce? What is your angle going to be? What's the technology you're going to use? Like, are you going to use video? Are you going to use audio? Are you going to use something else? Et cetera, et cetera. Are you going to go into a sequence? Like, for example, maybe if you had a wacky enough thing where people could, and to engage with your first immediate response, people had to click on something, which led to a really funny, engaging page that was generic, but like kind of like a scavenger hunt. And I'm literally just making this up off the top of my head. Now, if someone tries this and it fails, don't say, well, Spencer
because told me to.
I've never tried this for an email response, but let's pretend you had something that was like a scavenger hunt. Click on one email, led to something, and let's say that you did really well. It was really fun. Again, that type of thing could work, right? And so what you're after is just in broad. There's no specifics, because this can be anything out there. But what you're after is something that goes above and beyond. It kind of makes people say, "Whoa," and maybe what I'd say, kind of on the line of the idea of what I was just talking about, scavenger hunt. Not that people should try that approach, but if you can do something that's kind of fun, and it doesn't have to be funny. It can be funny, but if you do something that's kind of fun and lively, it makes people say, "Oh, this is a neat experience." That's going to get you a lot of extra bonus points. So for people who kind of have, let's say, a more serious brand where they're like, humor is just going to be too weird, although I'll be honest, humor is rarely going to be seen as weird if you do it right. But, if someone's feeling like, well, humor just doesn't fit my brand, then they can think, okay, what is going to generate like lots and lots of impact and make people kind of their jaws drop? And, most of it starts with just, again, like, I cannot emphasize it enough, just think like the client thinks. Do not think, how can I impress people? Think, if I am the client, what would impress me? Which is a very, very different question.
Right. It's totally different.
Yeah.
It's just I don't know. I think that this keeps coming up in a lot of the things that you're saying, is that we don't put ourselves on the other side of the interaction enough to kind of find where there's like what we're doing and how it's actually seen. Like, this goes across so many things, especially in photography. When it comes to like portfolio selection, when you're just looking for pictures to put in, a lot of people like want to put out pictures that they love, but like it's not necessarily what the clients want to see, or like what you've discussed this in other things, and like in the courses I've taken with you, when you talk about like photos that you don't want to take, don't put them out there like to people, like, so you don't keep putting the photo out there because you think that like, or if you like tons and tons of family portraits, if you don't like doing lots and lots of family portraits, so you don't want to attract that, because people looking at it are going to see it and go like, oh, well, this guy does a lot of these. It's not putting ourselves on the other side of this interaction and going like, how does it read to them? How does it, what response is it going to get from someone else? We get so personally wrapped up in our own stuff that we sometimes fail to see it from somebody else's point of view.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I train in Aikido, and I've been doing it for a decent bit of time now. One of the things that I used to do when I started, and honestly, sometimes I still do. I definitely do more than I should. But especially when I started, I was always thinking, and for anyone who doesn't know, Aikido is, it's a martial art that is based on using the physics of the opponent against them. And so the thing is that what I would always think first is like, what's the technique? Like, how am I supposed to move my body? Where am I supposed to stand? What am I supposed to do? And I found it just didn't work very well, because I wasn't responding to the person, like if they're taller or shorter, or heavier or whatever, right? Like if I'm trying to put them on the ground, my goal needs to be, how do I put them on the ground?
Right.
And what I would be thinking of was like, how do I execute technique and put my body in, and look really good from the outside? But what I wasn't doing is I wasn't adjusting my positions and how I moved to the actual person in front of me. And so thinking about how I put them on the ground is a wholly different thing than thinking about the technique. But when if you're not experienced, the default is, because you learn anything, technique first by nature, right? And that's usually how we learn most things. And so it's no different in this case. We're thinking about, like, what does our email sound like? How good a job did we do on the production of the video we sent? How good, blah, blah, blah. Or did we use great language? Whatever it is that you put into your replies. But of course, that's not your goal. Your goal is to get an emotional response, and you have to say, like, what is going to generate that, which I probably said like more than I need to, but I don't know. I take it back. I'm of the belief you can never say that too much. It's like, if there's anything I ever screwed up in business, it was that one point over and over and over in like a billion different ways. But getting people to react that's the everything of it. And if people, what I would say for anyone, at first it feels like you're staring at this big blank wall. It's easy for me to say, just, put on their hat and think about what their world is like. And, you try it and like, you think, I have no idea very often. And so what I'll tell anyone who's thinking about this is like, well, okay, there are tactics out there and you can read about different ideas and stuff like that. But the truth is, if you just relentlessly keep thinking, how does my audience see things? How do my clients feel? You will start to figure it out over time. And so even if you feel like you're staring at a blank wall, what'll happen is you'll find that just by trying to think about it and focus on it, you'll be walking around one day and you'll have an experience yourself and you're like, oh my God, that must be how other people feel. Or random thoughts will pop into your head out of nowhere. And it will start, like, you'll start to get resolution on this. The picture will come together, and it might feel like it won't at first. And you'll think, what the hell does this even mean? And I just want a template. But if you want to optimize this process and make something where you build up the skill of being able to change as the market changes, or if you decide to kind of change the way you do things, you might need a different response, and now you'll be able to figure out how. Then it starts with kind of trusting that process and just thinking intensely. I mean, there's no such thing as a great business who did not think about how their market was going to respond to them. And so it always starts there with any business transaction, no matter what, right? Yeah. And it will come together. It's just like, if you just don't give up and you don't fail and you don't say, okay, I just want an easier way. Because, there might be easier ways, but what there aren't state ways that are going to put you in control. And they're going to let you change and constantly improve, keep figuring things out as you go. And the more you work on it, the more it's going to pay off. And so, maybe a quick template will give you a quicker payoff in 1 week from right now. But 1 year from right now, 2 years from right now, I mean, taking the time to learn how to do this is something you'll be able to go back to over and over and over and use over and over and over in every part of your business, not just like dealing with inquiry replies.
Yeah, I think we've talked about fear and like things. I think there's a sort of people want the easy response. Like, the easy does not mean effective. I think is a really important thing to remember. Easy isn't going to get you the furthest. It might get you some responses immediately, but it doesn't mean it's going to help your business in the long run. And I think that one of the things that we're most afraid of is not knowing immediately what the response is to something. And it's hard to get ourselves into that testing mindset of being like, it's okay if something doesn't work. Because like you said, like maybe you're getting ghosted like 90% of the time on certain types of email or messages or whatever. And so trying something new, and like you said, if it ups it, response to like 30%, that's a 300% increase in positive responses. Like, but we're so scared of like, oh, I don't want to miss, I don't want to lose the little 10% that I've got. We get so afraid of trying something new. We have to get into that mindset of like, okay, I need to be able to try new things and really focus, like you mentioned, like on like, what do we want the response to be? What is the next step? Instead of just, like you said, throwing things at the wall and seeing what sticks.
Yeah. And that, I just want to point out that I love what you just said there. I think that's right on. And, what I want to add to that, or maybe everything I've said, as always, I think I always went going like record time whenever I talk on a podcast. But anyway, so I'll try to keep this brief. But there's kind of a magic power to both intention and attention. And a lot of times when we say we just want the template. We want the quick fix. What happens is we're just kind of we're looking for the thing that's secure, but also kind of the easiest thing, because it feels very uncertain to try to have to figure out things, figure out what to test, figure out how to be funny, let's say, or how to create impact or get into our audience's heads. And so, and again, at first they feel like blank walls. And so the reason I mention this is because, it's just so important to believe this, because this is the truest thing I know in life, is that, where your attention goes is when you direct it to a certain place, things will happen. And they don't always happen right away. People get dejected and they stop because of that. But things will happen. Like, we all have this amazing ability to solve problems if we stick with it, if we keep trying. And what will happen is, like, when you start thinking, okay, how do I be funny? What you'll start noticing, it's kind of like, how when you learn a new word, you see it everywhere.
Yeah.
When we start thinking, like, how do I get in my audience's head? How do I become a little bit more funny? What creates impact? You'll start noticing emails, other types of marketing, other things people do, and then you'll start getting ideas. And the more you kind of soak that in, the more ideas that start to come, and it gets the ball rolling. And it creates this great feedback loop where you get better and better much quicker than you think. But you just have to be kind of willing to let go of the kind of like when I was doing in Aikido, the technical response, the hard response, the
right.
template, and et cetera, and be willing to explore something and just kind of allow yourself to get sucked into it. And it actually becomes a lot more fun. Like, once you start doing it in earnest, you're no longer like just saying, oh, I'm doing boring marketing stuff and doing boring sales stuff. I just want this done. It starts to become fascinating because you're thinking, how can I take care of people? And wow, there are all these things out there, and your mind's moving and in flow, and ideas are coming. And it's just a much more rewarding way of doing business as a whole.
Yeah, you become like you mentioned, like, when you hear a new word, then you hear it, you see it everywhere. You want to become that earworm for the potential client, like something that they're always like kind of getting what you said stuck in their head. So that, like you said, be the first response that they get. Yeah. So that they like that your response is the thing that they always go back and sort of judge other responses by. Mm-hmm. So that you're the first thing in their head, and especially if you manage, like you said, get that humor in there or something that's different, you automatically set yourself apart. So they're always thinking of you.
Hey, Doc, thanks for seeing me.
No problem. I'm glad we got that whole other thing cleared up.
Yeah, I have to say, you scared me pretty bad when you told me I only had 6 months to live.
And you would have, in the Wild Wild West. But luckily, we have creams for that these days.
I appreciate it.
But I didn't ask you to come in to discuss life-saving salves and ointments.
What is it, Doc?
It's your WordPress website. It's old and outdated, and it needs a fresh new look.
I know, Doc. But I just don't have the money to pay a designer for a custom website.
You don't need to pay for a custom design when you use Flow Themes.
Flow Themes?
Yes, Flow Themes. They have a wide variety of WordPress themes for the modern creative. Not just photographers, but for videographers, florists, wedding planners, and much more.
But are they customizable to suit my needs?
Yes, every theme is totally customizable. Flow Themes has even launched a new line of Flex Themes, which allows you to customize your website further than ever before while maintaining a cohesive, professional-looking theme.
Where can I get one, Doc?
Go to nerdyphotographer.com/recommends/flow themes to learn more and see what they have to offer.
Thanks, Doc. I really appreciate it.
Good. But now we're going to need to talk about what's wrong with your uvula.
My uvula? What is it?
It's a small teardrop-shaped piece of soft tissue that hangs down in the back of your throat, but that's not important right now.
Hi, friends. Hi. Welcome to They're Terrified and Tipsy. My name is Courtney. And I'm Stephanie. Since we have very different feelings about scary movies, we decided to share our emotional struggles with you all. Yeah, so grab a glass of wine, your favorite couch blanket, and get comfy and enjoy the ride with us. You can find They're Terrified and Tipsy on Instagram and Twitter, plus all the podcast platforms. For links, head over to tipsypod.com. Cheers!
now for my favorite part of the show. What's that say? Useless information. This is always death.
So, Spencer, are you a cat or a dog person?
Dog. I mean, I've had both, so I like cats too. But we actually got a dog about a year back. And so I adore him. So I'm going to officially put myself in the dog column now.
You're in the dog column. I'm a more of a dog person myself. Okay, so cats, long considered to be guardians of the underworld, and especially in like ancient Egypt and things like that. So dealing with ghosts, can't taste anything sweet. They actually lack the genetic makeup. They're lacking 247 pairs of amino acids that make it possible to form the protein that would allow you to taste something sweet. So that's maybe why cats are so bitter.
I had no idea.
Exactly. That's why it's useless. Totally useless. Just don't give don't give a cookie to a cat. They don't care.
Well, that's like knowing your audience, right?
Yeah.
So ties in well.
More you know about, you don't try to, give things that are going to appease a cat that way. Spencer, where can people, if they want to like tune in to more of you, where can people find you?
The best place to go is at my website. And I have a couple, but I'm going to point to the website, goextrabold.com. And that's the one where, like, in terms of email and marketing, that's what I'm working on most nowadays. And so a lot of great stuff about content creation there and strategy and everything else. So goextrabold.com, that's where I'd say to check me out.
Awesome. Folks, go over there, goextrabold.com. Check out Spencer. Spencer, thank you very much for being on the podcast again.
Thanks a lot.
Hey, welcome back. I'd like to thank Spencer Lum for being on the episode. You should definitely go check him out over at goextrabold.com. If you enjoyed the episode, please be sure to subscribe and leave a review. Reviews on Apple Podcasts, Podchaser, and Good Pods actually really help us out. And I seem to have found the source of our mysterious noise. It's just around this corner. And oh, who are you? I'm a ghost. Yeah, I figured, since you're transparent and all. And you were saying boo over and over again. I wasn't saying boo. You weren't? I was saying boo words. Ugh, that was terrible. Be sure to follow us on Instagram, Twitter, Reddit, and TikTok at The Nerdy Photo. You just got ghosted, son. That's not what that term means. I'm a ghost. It can mean whatever I want it to mean. Okay, I'm going to go find some sage to burn to clean this out. Until next time, everybody, stay safe and stay nerdy.
Who's that coming back to town? You better start listening. Who's your heart been beating about? You better listen.